Hello, welcome to this Universities UK webinar on smart specialisation. My name is Greg Wade. I lead on innovation and growth policy here at UUK. Can I introduce my colleague, Kevin Richardson from HEFCE? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, Greg. Kevin Richardson, Higher Education Funding Council for England. As you rightly say, Greg, otherwise known as HEFCE. I'm a local growth advisor at the organisation with particular focus on the use of the new HEFCE programme and hopefully with some knowledge of smart specialisation from my previous couple of years working for the Department of Business.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. The format for this webinar will be I've got a raft of questions to ask Kevin, and we'll spend about 25 to 30 minutes doing that. And then we'll take questions from participants at the end. You can post questions at any time, either by logging in to the YouTube Google account, via a Google account, or via a tweet at the hashtag S3webinar, or you can email James Ransom directly. He'll be passing me the questions at the end. And all the details about this can be found when you scroll down below the YouTube broadcast. So we'll kick off, Kevin, if that's okay.
Okay.
Firstly, could you describe what topics you're hoping to cover in the next 25 minutes?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and I think this is an experiment. Let's see how it goes. I think we're going to try to cover in a relatively short space of time a number of distinct aspects. One is, let's look at the concept of smart specialisation. Mm-hmm. What is it? What is it not? Because I think there's lots of different understandings out there. Most importantly, from our perspective, well, what is it? Why is it important for universities? Why are we talking about it today? Then perhaps we can talk a little bit about smart specialisation and the use of the new HEFCE programme. Hopefully with a little bit of we'll be starting either later this year or early next year. And then finally we can perhaps identify that the current discussions around the functions and form of what is currently known as the advisory hub for smart specialisation and how people can get involved in that.
Okay, that's great. Why do you think we need to talk about this now?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I think the first one, and those people who are involved in the development of the new HEFCE programme will be aware that there's let's call it a condition placed upon the new funding programme, that a smart specialisation strategy needs to be in place. And we can come back to that a little bit later about what that condition is. But I think more importantly, if we look at the concept of smart more generally and what it's trying to do, it addresses this issue of productivity and why is there a productivity gap between some parts of England and others, between England and Europe, but most importantly with economies such as in the United States, because this concept arose out of studies around productivity and what are the sort of the trends and the driving forces which are bringing that forward. And of course at the same time, there are increasing debates, not just within England, but amongst most of the Western economies around the relative importance of a place-based approach to economic development as opposed to a spatially blind approach, which are perhaps taken forward at a national level, and what's the right balance and interplay between those two. And I think the next reason, I think, is for the right reasons at the right times. In the past, innovation policies were designed in a certain way, but I think there's a perception within the concept that previous policies for innovation tended to be badly evidenced, badly prioritised, and in many cases, while some succeeded, others did not. So how do we develop better policies for innovation? I think at its fundamental, that's what smart specialisation is trying to address.
Okay, so tell us, what is smart specialisation?
Difficult to do in a short space of time, but perhaps it's easier to pick out some of the things which it's not. Right? It's not a policy. It's a method or a process by which priorities can be identified. Okay. So we don't say I've got a smart specialisation policy. We've used smart specialisation to do and decide some things. Nor is it a source of money. I've heard one or two people say, I will use my smart specialisation finance to do this. That's a popular misconception. It's also not just about sectors, and I think this is a common misunderstanding. Smart specialisation recognises that in many aspects the economy is driven forward by the development of sectors, but increasingly in understanding that there are a number of technologies which translate across sectors. The literature talks around key enabling technologies, and they transfer between one sector and another, and how they build resilience and adaptability in a local economy. And in the English context at the moment, within the industrial sector strategies, we look at what are known as the 8 great technologies. So it's a combination of understanding place, sectors, but also across sectors using different technologies.
Okay.
Nor is the concept about picking winners. That's always a difficult process, of course. It's about, and someone said to me, it's not about finding the right horse to back in a race. It's about finding the race with a small number of horses and backing them all. It's about building diverse specialisms and not putting all of your eggs in one basket. It's about understanding and spreading risk across a range of diverse specialisms. And finally, it isn't just something for places which are less developed. You know, there's often a view in policies for innovation or regeneration or economic growth that we only need to support those areas which are less developed. The policy is designed to be used across the European Union and across England, even for those economies which are doing relatively well at the moment. So those are things which are not smart specialisation.
Okay. What would you say are the key concepts that we need to know about and understand?
The literature is very well advanced and sometimes quite academic, and needs to be translated into policy and language that more people and more business people can understand. But I think there are 4 terms which are really critical to understanding the concept. One is about this issue around embeddedness. And embeddedness is about how do we ensure that when proposals are made and prioritisation takes place, that they do so in a proper context and understanding of where a place has come from, its history, its skill sets, its physical assets, its soft assets, its networks, its people. So ensuring that it's right for that particular place, and it's not something that's just landed in an area and that doesn't really fit or hasn't got a history, or and that's really, really important to this concept. You know, is it of that place? You know, is it part of those strengths? The next concept, which I think is important, is the issue about connectedness. And that's not, as some people say, a call to build better dual carriageways or motorways or high-speed trains. In this context, it's about understanding where are our particular strengths, you know, comparative advantages, and how they relate to similar places elsewhere. Now, that could be in England, it could be in Europe, it could be in the East. How they relate in terms of relative strengths, where they are in the trajectories, what are the flows of knowledge and finance and supply. So that issue, how is it bedded in? You know, how do they link together? I think that issue of connectedness. Next, the issue of relatedness, and that's the point about understanding that there are increasingly sectors aren't driven forward on their own. They are brought together, and there are technologies which can be applied across sectors. So embeddedness, relatedness, connectedness. And finally, something that's got a very peculiar name called the entrepreneurial process of discovery.
Okay.
Let's put that jargon to one side. What is that trying to say? How can partners come together and think and act in a way in which, in a manner of which businesses would act? How can they spot the opportunities? How can they test them? How can they think long term about the added values? And by those partners we mean not just universities, but businesses, of course, who have much better knowledge of where their sector fits in a global sense, but also the third sector, public leaders, how the different agencies work together in a way in which is a manner of the type of which a business would think and act. So it's entrepreneurial process. Let's just call it the search process.
Okay, thank you. What do you think are the main challenges to making it work effectively?
I think it's really important to think about the challenges before anyone sets out on this journey, because applied fully, it isn't an easy process. The purpose of smart specialisation is to encourage and guide people to perhaps think and prioritise differently to that in which they would have otherwise done. It wants you to do something a bit different. And of course, that's always a challenge. Some people have said that it's easier in bigger places, in bigger cities, in city regions, core cities, where there are more institutions, there's more institutional capacity. I actually think it is actually equally applicable in all places, smaller areas and rural areas as well. I'm not of that mind which thinks it's only for the big cities. And if we think about smart specialisation as being something which isn't just about sectors, that's different from a sectoral approach, which is sometimes easier to do, because people can understand sectors a lot more and can relate to them. And I think another challenge is about identifying opportunities for incremental growth rather than being overly ambitious.
Okay.
And of course, there is a tendency amongst decision-making processes in England to be seen to be ambitious, whereas this concept calls about perhaps a greater realism. And of course, part of that process, and quite rightly, in each local area, there are lobby groups. Now, some of those lobby groups have a well-made case. Sometimes the concept of smart specialisation, would argue, is those lobby groups are making a case which isn't found on good evidence. So how do you work through the difficult process of identifying priorities where you've got a number of different lobby groups? And finally, of course, understanding your own strengths in an area is important, but to do so you need to understand the strengths elsewhere. So that knowledge of distant economies. Now, distant may be in the next LEP area. It may be between North and South England, or it could be in Milan, for instance, or in Beijing. So that's part of that understanding the relative strength. And part of that, of course, is thinking about this concept. Is it always best applied at what some would say as artificial geographies? LEP areas, for instance, were designed to be based upon functional economic areas. Now, many are, but in terms of the way in which innovation flows, the knowledge of innovation, the geography of innovation is often very different to LEP areas. So again, that's another challenge for local areas, perhaps to think out of the geographical box, as it were.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. A bit of a crunch question for us. Why is it important to universities?
Very reason why we're here today. And I think there's three different levels at which a university works. Every university has an international focus and an international relevance, and many develop new technologies and knowledges which apply across the globe. And of course, when we look at English universities, many of them are based in the top 50 in the world. That's accepted, and it's not a challenge. Universities also play an important national role and provide centres of excellence and a provision which applies across all of England. Again, not challenged. But increasingly we're seeing, in the context of local growth, more universities being much more aware and beginning to develop their role within their local economy as what some people call an anchor institution, something that's very embedded. And every university has that role to play, sometimes in different ways and different scales. But smart specialisation is a tool or a method of thinking and working which isn't very neatly overlaying on the way in which universities work and their particular strengths, and how they can work with partners to help frame the decision making on prioritisation for economic growth and local growth at a local area.
Okay, that's very well argued. Can you ask us or tell us what specifically what you think universities can bring to the process?
What can they bring to the table?
And
I think if we actually look at research centres in universities around England, many of them have been there for a long time. And they were developed in that place for a particular reason, because in the past, that type of industry was prevalent. So there is an understanding of often an understanding of local strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, universities and the researchers often have a particularly strong, not just knowledge of the local economy, but networks and relationships with the local businesses, particularly through their collaborative research programs. But at the same time, they often have a better understanding of where that fits in the context of how globalization is impacting upon the local economy. So they understand the context and the place, and they can bring real value. Universities, of course, manage and own and can analyze important sets of data, and they can bring that quantitative information to the table and then help partners understand it. I think that's a real strength and opportunity for universities. And finally, of course, as the local decision-making process goes forward and priority actions are identified, quite often for innovative actions and commercialization programs, universities can help deliver that. With their collaborative research programs, their engagement with businesses, and their contract research. So it's part of framing what it is they need to do with their local business community as well.
Yeah.
And finally, of course, what many academics like to do, they like to monitor and evaluate.
Yeah.
And at the end of that policy cycle, as it were, there's an additional role for universities, because smart specialization isn't a start and a finish. It's a cycle, it's an ongoing process. Mm-hmm. So throughout that cycle, universities can play different roles at different times.
Yeah. I mean, many of us will have come across the phrase smart specialization in discussions about European structural funds.
Yes.
Could you outline the links between the two?
Yeah, I think this is important. I think the first thing I would like to say in response is smart specialization is not just about the use of European structural investment funds.
Yeah.
However, the structural investment funds and the new rules which govern them require, or what is known as a condition, they require the existence of a smart specialization strategy before the ESIF funds can be released.
Mm-hmm.
Or it needs to be in place before the funds can roll for a period of time.
Yeah.
And that condition requires the existence of a national or regional strategy. And in the case of England, the decision has been made to have a national strategy, which contains a SWOT analysis or similar, a limited number of priorities, i.e. have you made some decisions, measures to increase private sector investment, it needs a monitoring mechanism, and it needs to show how much cash is being brought to the table by different agencies, primarily public agencies, of which the ESIF is actually a relatively minor part. So that's sort of the condition, i.e. unless we fulfill that requirement, then the funds won't be released.
Okay. Does England have an approved smart specialisation strategy?
No, not yet, but hopefully shortly. The government has submitted a draft smart specialisation strategy to the European Commission. Mm-hmm. Part of that process required the national committee, which is overseeing those funds, on which UK has a seat. It required a self-assessment. That self-assessment has been done. We are now waiting for some feedback from the European Commission, and that's expected imminently. Excellent. Now, and I think the view within government departments is that we've met the criteria, but of course, in any sensible negotiation, if another party can bring a good idea which improves it, which is reasonable and delivered within a relatively short space of time, then there may be a room for maneuver and further refinement over the course of the next few weeks. So those discussions are starting very, very shortly.
Okay. Can you tell us more about what's in it?
Yeah, the strategy is very much based upon the industrial strategy for the United Kingdom, and its focus on based upon this search process and evidence and prioritisation. 10 of the 11 sector strategies, excluding the development of capacity for higher education, only if we could use the funds for that, but we can't.
Absolutely.
And of course, the 8 great technologies. So those provide the overall framework for the whole of England.
Okay. 11 sector strategies. Is this too many?
Well, I think the first thing we need to recognise, England is a relatively small country. Its economy is still large in global terms, and it's a highly complex economy, with very different specialisms in different parts of the country. In preparing this strategy, the evidence was quite clear actually that at the moment, much investment by businesses in research and development and commercialization is actually focused in on quite a small number of sectors, aerospace being one, automotive being another. And actually, in order to increase levels of private sector investment in research, it is actually more appropriate to widen the number of sectors from the 4 or 5, which currently dominate, to perhaps a larger number. But within that, though, I think it's important to recognise that there is no expectation in each local area they will all have a specialism in each of the sector strategies and in each of the 8 great technologies. That process at a local level will help identify which of those is most appropriate for their local area.
Okay. Is that menu firmly fixed?
I think that the industrial strategy and the 8 great technologies provide a good framework. And I think when we look at ESIF, the likelihood is a good percentage or a large percentage of the ESIF will be focused towards those activities. But the strategy does recognise that in some places, provided it's backed with good evidence, and there's been a proper process of analysis, if there's a local particular specialism or a niche which isn't really, fits into the general headings of the sector strategies, then provision is inbuilt to do that. Okay. So it's not a rigid box, but it's a framework, I think. Okay. I think the trick is, if there is something that's niche, is there good evidence to back that up? Okay,
great. Just to be clear, is it necessary for local areas to have a smart specialisation strategy in place?
No, the answer is very clear. It's no. The requirement in the rules is to have a national or regional. The decision in England, of course, we don't have regional structures any longer. It's a national strategy. However, when the government published its documents for local enterprise partnerships and the partners to develop their proposals for ESIF, it did recognise that the process was strong and was credible. And I think the phrase used was strongly encourage local areas to use smart specialisation. And if not in a full, the full formal process and a full formal document, but to use the steps which are set out in the guidance notes as a method and a route to make better decisions. So, and I think that depends upon local circumstances. And is it appropriate for your area? If you're a large metropolitan area or a relatively small rural area, what's best for you, and how best can you use the process in a way which best meets your needs?
Okay. Could you give some examples of where strategies are in place?
Yeah, there's a few already. Manchester, for instance, they went through and developed a full smart specialisation strategy, and they submitted it to a peer review at the level of the European Union. So they had their work examined by their peers through a system which is facilitated by the Joint Research Centre in Seville. And a very fair but rigorous approach, which is seen as very helpful. Tees Valley LEP, we've gone through a process. North East LEP, lots of work done on smart specialisation in Cornwall. Other places such as Kent. I've received another telephone call this morning about a LEP in the east of England, which is keen to take this forward. So we've seen some good examples. And the numbers increasing.
Okay. Moving on, could you tell us something about the advisory hub that we've heard about?
In the independent report of Sir Andrew Whitty, for those people who will be aware, the Whitty report recommended, certainly commended the concept of smart specialisation to the government, and recommended that the government set up an advisory or a support facility to help people understand and to best use the concept. The government accepted those proposals, and a few months ago the government invited the National Centre for Universities and Business to work with partners, consult obviously, and to bring forward proposals on the possible functions and form of that advisory hub.
Okay. Do we know, is it taking shape? Do we know what it's starting to look like?
Well, it's advice to ministers, and obviously the ministers will need to make a decision later in the autumn. But in working with the National Centre for University and Business, I think there's a view coming across during that consultation that it should be about acting as a critical friend and providing good advice, and about building linkages and brokerage across places and spreading intelligence and best practice. But it won't be a body which acts as a gatekeeper and which can stop and prevent people. I think that's not something which...
That's good news.
And of course, there is a committee which will oversee the use of this ESIF funding, and it may be that one of the functions of the advisory hub is to provide advice on an ongoing basis to that hub about how well the concept is being implemented over a period of time in England.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that update. For smart specialisation itself, what do you think is going to happen next?
I think, as I said earlier, we're awaiting the outcome of the negotiations.
Yeah.
The draft Smart Specialisation Strategy, may need some refinement after those negotiations. So perhaps a little while. Yeah. We also need to see the proposals for the way in which the National Committee will operate and how it wants to work with its proposed subcommittees.
Yeah.
So I think we're still in that development stage. I think from now until Christmas, we'll be beginning to see those proposals take a greater shape, as it were.
Okay. My final question, well, one of my final questions is, where can colleagues get more information?
Lots of places. Those who are perhaps new to it, I think if you look at something called the RIS3 guide,
right?
RIS3, just Google it and you'll find it. It's published by the Smart Specialisation platform in Seville, which in itself is a really good location for knowledge about what other places are doing around Europe, examples of those peer reviews, some really good literature and best practice guides. And for if colleagues who are listening in and watching today want to keep in touch on a more regular basis, yourself, obviously Greg and James, you manage a rather large and active group on LinkedIn. More than welcome, join that email distribution list. So we'll keep colleagues in touch with what's happening over the important next few weeks and months.
Excellent. Thank you so much for running through, giving us a very clear run through on smart specialisation and an update and a look forward. Colleagues who are watching, this is an opportunity for you to submit any questions if anything hasn't been particularly clear, or if you want Kevin to expand on any of the things that he's mentioned. This is where I look to my wonderful assistant James, who's standing behind the camera and collecting any questions that might come in. One other question while we're waiting for any questions to come in that I have is this predominantly a European concern or issue?
The concept is being applied across the European Union.
Yeah.
But its roots were in the United States.
Okay.
A very clever guy called Dominic Fourier and others did some work, as I said earlier, looking at the sources of how productivity is improving, how technology is improving in the context of particular places.
Yeah.
So, it isn't something that's coming out of an institution in Brussels, and it's something that's being done to us.
Yeah. Okay.
But it is being applied across the European Union, and indeed when we look at the membership of the Smart Specialisation platform, the number of regions who are joining in and being part of the process has grown very rapidly.
Yeah.
And indeed England actually joined the Smart Specialisation platform for that purpose.
Okay, that's helpful. Another question I have is, we mentioned a little bit about it earlier, but if you're in a LEP area or a sort of economic region that doesn't really relate to the 11 sector strategies and the industrial strategy, could you expand more on whether smart specialisation is still relevant?
I think when we look at the strategic economic plans which were submitted to government by the LEPs and their more specific proposals for their investment plans for the use of ESIF, I think we find that almost every proposal identified an element of the industrial sector which was relevant for their particular area. I think it's very difficult to find anywhere where there isn't a potential specialism or relative strength.
Yeah.
But I think what's also important to recognise is that that process allows a local area to identify similar other places in England which have similar comparative advantages and embedded strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps part of this process is to think, well, okay, let's look over the boundary a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think if we look at, when we looked at the original report of Sir Andrew Whitty, to the rear of that report were a whole series of maps which sought to identify relative concentrations of numbers of firms and numbers of employees by the sector. And for some of those sectors, they were very focused on particular places, such as nuclear supply chain for example. But other sectors were much more prevalent across England.
Yeah.
So I think it is applicable in every place, but in different places in different ways. And that's part of this concept of understanding, with a greater degree of authority and evidence and credibility, what are we really good at?
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Well, we haven't been inundated with a vast number of questions, which probably indicates that you've been exceptionally thorough and clear. So you have my thanks and the UK's thanks for coming along and talking to us.
Thank you for the invitation.
A pleasure. I should just say that Universities UK will be keeping in touch with our members via the LinkedIn network, and so we will keep you updated on developments on smart specialisation as they occur. And we're working very closely with Kevin and other colleagues at HEFCE and colleagues at BIS. Thank you.